Well, welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 358th meeting since we started in February of 2009. We put a speaker on every week, a different subject. We require our speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. I'm losing track here. We have our position on an issue or express a point of view. Then we have questions and answers if anybody interrupts the speaker, remind the interrupter, we'll listen only one fool at a time, one of our rules. And then we have questions and answers from the audience, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. Everybody in the audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond when the speaker said for or against. Their speaker gets the last word, gets a comment and close the meeting. That's how it works. Before we introduce our speakers, we have time for announcements. Does anybody have announcements? Now's the time to make them. Any announcements? No announcements? None? I can't believe this. No announcements. Jim, you got any announcements?
I'll preach a sermon.
Go ahead, come on up here and preach a sermon then.
The Sermon on the Mount.
Well, thank you, brothers and sisters, for coming together on this glorious night. We're here to share with our noble professor tonight, and we hope you will enjoy it. So that's the end of the sermon. I won't carry on in that vogue. Thank you very much. We're glad you're here tonight, so really that's true. And I just want to remind you of a couple of things. We appreciate the hospitality of Roma's. We like having this nice private room to meet in and be able to talk and visit and socialize and hear a good speaker just about every week, something different. And the format has worked out to be so good for us. The questions sometimes bring out more than we imagined from the speech, and the comments sometimes do the same. Now last week the speaker knew more about what the speaker was talking about than any of us did, so we had questions but we didn't have very many comments. And then sometimes it can be the other way around. So it's always very interesting, and we appreciate your participation very much. The main thing I want to leave with you tonight is just a reminder. Those of you who are regular know what it is, and that is Roma's doesn't charge us a fat fee for using the room, and that's how Tom manages to collect only $3 from you when you come, which is nice. We like that. So we want to keep it that way, and I want you to be sure and treat our server nice and tip the server. Don't come in and just order a Coke and leave a nickel on the table. Thank you. I'm exaggerating the point, but you understand. We have to make this economically viable for them, just as it is for us. And their prices are reasonable. You can eat for a little bit or you can spend a bit. But please do take good care of the server, and we will enjoy your presence here always. Speaker we're having tonight, we've had several times, and goodness, I believe the last time he spoke to us the last Saturday before he took off to the great islands of Hawaii, which is a favorite hangout of his now that he's retired and can do that from the daily grind of the professorial role at Eastfield Community College. And so we're so glad, and then he came and talked to us right after he got back. So we got a good description of his trip and things he saw different and places he'd been. So we always enjoy his presentations, and he's an excellent communicator. So tune in to him tonight and see if you can get something good and useful out of his presentation. Thank you very much.
Any other announcements? Well, next week is how are Ruby Ridge, Waco, and Vince Foster connected, and why should we care? That's on your itinerary there. Our speaker's not here. That's Pat O'Connell. She'll be here next week. The following week is Love Your Country, Leave Your Party, and How Partisan Politics Lost Its Grip. That's Roland Rangel. He'll be talking about that. April 22nd, Sid Richardson in Texas Oil. It's Jim Gatewood. He spoke here before. He's a Dallas history professor, a leading bestseller Dallas author. He's written a new book. He'll be here to present it and talk about that. So April 29th, drug war and how we got into this mess and the vested interests that keep us here. That's also on your itinerary. I'm not going to read all this. And that's Suzanne Wills. She's a retired CPA whose advocacy is drug policy reform. She'll be talking on April 29th. Anyway, it's all on your itinerary. And our speaker tonight is Dr. Chris Boldt. He's a mathematics professor emeritus and an in-depth researcher. He's going to talk on the question of other-centeredness. He will discuss present strategies as to how other-centeredness can impact dealing with insecure personalities, defensiveness, strategies, and interpersonal congeniality. Chris will also point out clues to show good ways this can affect one's own psychological and physiological health. So without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Chris Boldt. It's all yours, Chris.
I was feeling a little insecure. I was worried about the introduction that Tom and Jim were going to give for me tonight. What I was afraid of is they were going to come up and say, we're going to have a really good speaker tonight. April Fool.
Oh, well,
I
restrained myself.
no, it wasn't easy, Appreciate you guys and all you do. I can't believe the setup, and you folks know that they have all of these on the internet, and I live so far from here that I don't make it as much as I want to myself, but and I live in Frisco, and let me tell you, what I'm sorry to have to report is that the traffic there is worse than the middle of downtown Dallas. The corner where Sam Rayburn and the Dallas Tollway meet, the southwest corner, they're predicting will have 20,000 jobs in that area after Toyota and a couple other companies move in. It is unbelievable. They had the intersection of the Tollway and Sam Rayburn shut down. I had to leave, go back around, and go all the way through Frisco, and then come over on Sam Rayburn over to 75, where ordinarily I just shoot down the tollway and come over. So traffic is terrible. Not anything we can do about it. One of the things that I'm going to point out tonight has to do with insecurity, and I'm going to show you a photo now that I've shown here before. The first time I showed it, I said that this is what I looked like when Tom first asked me to give a talk. But now I've got to also work my, make sure my, it gets up, yeah.
Oh,
Do y'all remember that guy?
sure do.
Icky Twerp. Isn't that the most perfect example of insecurity that you've ever seen? I love that. I'll have some basic contentions mixed in with some things that I think I've never seen. The first contention here is I claim insecurity on the part of ourselves or others is the primary source of all psychological, physiological, and sociological problems. I think it is really a source of many, many problems. The second contention is, I claim that secure individuals don't have a need to feel that they have to prove anything to other people. They can just enjoy life and realize that the most uplifting activity of all lies simply in the loving and doing for others, whether it be family, friends, or strangers. Now, I'm going to cover some items on dealing with undesirable personalities. And I've got about 14 of these here. The first one I say is self-centered, but I point out that all of the others, such as aggressive, argumentative, overbearing, disrespectful, egotistical, well, you can see the list. There are 14 in all, but that includes self-centered. And at the bottom, I claim that the 2nd through the 14th are all symptoms of self-centeredness. So a lot of these things follow from that. Now, in terms of dealing with them, I point out that none of the aforementioned undesirable behaviors conform to the Golden Rule guideline, which encourages us to treat others as we'd want to be treated ourselves. Christ said that all the other parts of the Christian philosophy depended on loving your neighbor as yourself in addition to loving God. And, you know, when loving God, when you say that, that's a pretty broad statement. I guess I've always tried to think, well, what does that mean, being as we don't really have a simple identity, and I guess it's just the beautiful things we have around us and the value systems that we think we've read in what we think are deity-inspired documents. The third contention is, I say that when one is confronted with undesirable personalities, it's important to realize that all such behaviors are rooted in insecurity, which creates the resulting psychological maladjustments on the part of the individuals that are so engaged. So when you run into some kind of behavior you think is undesirable, I think you'll find the root source of that will in every case be some kind of insecurity. And I point out that secure, other-centered, and resultantly well-adjusted individuals have neither the time nor the inclination to participate in undesirable behaviors toward others. A strategy that I think works well in order to deal with such behaviors, or personalities, is to attempt to determine what the underlying insecurities they have are. And once that you identify those insecurities, you have one or more of the following healthy responses will result. You'll either have a healthy chuckle or a feeling of pity for the individual, or both. Now, I also mentioned none of those aforementioned results will add any emotional or intellectual baggage to the innocent second-party victims of the undesirable behaviors involved, and resultantly, hard and distressing feelings are minimized, if not completely eliminated. I also want to make a point. Did you ever notice that the Lord's Prayer speaks in terms of us and not I or me? I'm now going to point some things that I think I've never seen. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't have a basically secure personality. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who did have a basically secure personality. And I point out that aggressiveness, when not in the defense of others, disrespectfulness and egotism are simply masks for insecurity. Two other things I think I've never seen. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who wasn't significantly happy. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who was significantly happy. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't have a healthy sense of humor and was predominantly fun-loving. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who did have a healthy sense of humor and was predominantly fun-loving. People get so involved with themselves, they are hesitant to enjoy a lot of things around them. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't enjoy self-deprecating humor. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who did enjoy self-deprecating humor. You know, and I'm going to point it out as we get a little further along here, and that is when you're dealing with somebody, total stranger, nothing lightens the load quicker than a little bit of self-deprecating humor. It makes other people feel really comfortable right off the bat. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't enjoy a good breathtaking laugh. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who did frequently enjoy a good breathtaking laugh. You know, when I first thought of this idea, I got to thinking about some people I know. They're nice people, but some people just, can't really absorb a really good, boisterous laugh, you know. And my conclusion is it's because of their insecurity. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who wasn't predominantly optimistic. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who was predominantly optimistic. Self-centered people are so involved with themselves and their own future, they worry too much about it. I think I've never seen a other-centered person who wasn't greatly at peace with themselves. On the other hand, I've never seen a self-centered person who was greatly at peace with themselves. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who wasn't predominantly open-minded. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who was predominantly open-minded. And I think what I've witnessed is that others' differing opinions are quite often considered as a threat to such an individual. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't have a good self-image they were comfortable with. On the other hand, for self-centered people, I've never seen one who I thought did have a good self-image. They're insecure about it. I got a bunch of these, obviously. I'll get to them, but these contrasts, I think, help to give us some insights. And of course, there are always exceptions to any of this, but I don't think many. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't radiate self-confident success. On the other hand, I've never seen a self-centered person who did radiate self-confident success. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who wasn't primarily easy to get along with. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who was primarily easy to get along with. They might have certain individuals they get along with well, but not as globally present as with the other-centered people. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't have a lot of close friends. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who did have a lot of close friends. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who was not primarily sensitive to other people's feelings. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who was primarily sensitive to other people's feelings, because they're so self-involved, they never get into that other range. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't enjoy being complimentary of others and building them up. On the other hand, I think that self-centered people have difficulty and don't feel comfortable doing such things. And, you know, that's very rewarding. Nothing makes you feel better than to have something positive to say about and to other people. And, you know, don't even worry about yourself. Forget about that. I think it's really good whenever anybody does stuff that I couldn't even touch. I'm quick to say, hey man, that was great. Now, we just saw an example of something tonight that I'll never figure out. And that is when the gentleman who runs this audio-visual stuff came through playing a violin. Violins don't have any frets. How do they know where to put their finger? And they do it consistently and they do it correctly. Not only on the right string, but at the right location. And it's magnificent. It's beyond anything I can comprehend. And I guess that's where the word gifted comes from, you know. That's truly a gift. That's one among many that I do not have. Another item is that an other-centered person, I've never seen an other-centered person who was too full of self. On the other hand, I think I've seen a lot of self-centered people who were. I think I've never seen an other-centered person who wasn't a good family person. On the other hand, I've never seen a self-centered person who was a good family person. You know what? When you get right down to it, anytime you have divisions in family, I'd predict that at least one of the parties is very self-centered, and maybe more than one. But the other-centered overlook things, and it makes life really, really better. I had a sister that I loved to death. She went through a tough time in her life where she wasn't that cordial with me, but outgrew it, and I, at the time, overlooked it and realized she was going through a tough time. And later on, everything turned to gold for her and her husband. They ended up owning 6 supermarkets, and he was president of a national grocery organization. But my greatest trophy in life is a pillow that I've got on my couch at home. I lost my sister in 2008. But the greatest trophy I ever got in my life, and I don't think it's really justified, but I love it to death. It's a pillow that says, let me see if I get this right now. I'm gonna have to work on this. Anyway, it basically said, it's not, I laugh because you are my brother, and I don't bother the line. I didn't write it down. I'm gonna have to come back to that. I'm ashamed, but anyway, it just flipped out of my mind tonight. The next one that I had was another centered person who was easily threatened. And I think that a lot of self-centered people are much more easily threatened. Another item I point out is an other-centered person who didn't place group, here's an important one, didn't place concern for group mission accomplishments above who gets credit. And I've never seen a self-centered person who did place concern for the group mission concept above who gets the credit. And we see that on sports teams all the time. When players and coaches give credit to others for the great job that they have. I've never seen an other-centered person who wasn't primarily easy to get along with. On the other hand, I've never seen a self-centered person who was primarily easy to get along with. I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't have a lot of close friends. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who did have a lot of close friends. I've never seen an other-centered person who was not primarily sensitive to other people's feelings. On the other hand, I've never seen a self-centered person who did the same thing. I've never seen an other-centered person who didn't, and I think I hit this earlier, didn't enjoy being complimentary of others and building them up. And I've never seen a self-centered person who did feel comfortable doing that. I said that a little different way earlier, I believe. I'm going to have to do some manipulating here. Well, I'll skip one, that's okay. I've never seen an other-centered person who wasn't very loving of others. On the other hand, I think I've never seen a self-centered person who was very loving of others. And here's another one that I guess it still kind of bothers me to this day when I run into it. I've never seen an other-centered person who wasn't always comfortable admitting they didn't know something new they were told about. You know, quite often I'll have friends that I tell something and they say, oh yeah, I've known all about that, and I'll probe into it and they don't know that much about it, you know. And I've never seen a self-centered person who was always comfortable admitting they didn't know something they were told. Just another sign of insecurity. I'm having trouble here. Excuse me. Here's a little tip I have. The best way to start each day is to include at least one item on your daily to-do list which involves doing something nice for someone else, which is exclusive of any thoughts concerning anything in return. Well, I'm back to the previous problem. I'm sorry. What happened was this mouse was very special. It had a backside that was for handling remote control of your computer, going from frame to frame. And I got a new computer, and the new computer works where it works from the top side. But the problem is the old method was better in terms of reversing back to a previous frame. So I've got to do a little tricky item here that is a little time consuming. I talk here about what I consider the ultimate other-centered example, and one that I don't think we really are able to fully comprehend. And that very simply is the practice of mothers, and I say including among humans and also in the animal kingdom, to place the lives and or safety of their offspring at higher priorities than their own. And I say, hey, is this the most prominent evidence of a deity in our midst? What else could be the motivation? And you know, that even works with bears, I hear. I hear that sometimes the papa bears will try to harm the baby bears, and the mother bears will fight to protect them, even at the expense of their lives in some instances. So that is really, there's something inside us, our mothers, that is just very, very hard to fully appreciate and understand. It's bigger than we are. You know, the computer's now trying to help me. I wish it would not.
I understand that.
I'm going to try something right now just to see what happens. And nothing happened. Okay. Here we go. Okay, I've already covered this one. Here we go. Okay. I point out that, and here's a point I want to make, and it's something I don't really understand. For those who don't accept Christianity in terms of being a religion, that don't believe in the deity of Christ, I ask, what problems do they have with his philosophy? And I say, as enunciated in the red letter portion of the Bible, in terms of personal codes of conduct, or as an ordering ideology for society, something that every nation needs. The golden rule is nothing but other-centeredness. I've always been impressed, and I guess I call myself an extreme Jeffersonian. But Thomas Jefferson printed a Bible that was nothing but the red letter part. And he believed that the ethical system of Jesus was the finest the world has ever seen. He's talking about philosophy. He's not talking about a religion. And his Bible was just the guidelines for living the philosophy set forth by Christ. Didn't involve the other. And he said, in compiling what has come to be known as the Jefferson Bible, he sought to separate those ethical teachings from the religious dogma and other supernatural elements that are intermixed in the account provided by the four Gospels. He included only direct quotes from Christ. And I have a handout up here for those that are interested when this is over. Somewhere I read that all of Christ's guidelines for living, it was virtually complete in the book of Matthew. So I went through and wrote each of those in as briefly as I could. And I tried to identify all of them. When I got through, I had 104. And what I did, I printed them out on one page, front and back. After it was over with, I added one that I thought was worthwhile. And I got this out of, I think I got it out of Mark. But anyway, it said, greater love hath no man for another than to give his life for the individual. Yeah. But I was impressed with, so I call myself, Jefferson, I think, also included parables and everything. Well, my sheet just has the guidelines for living in Matthew So I call myself an extreme Jeffersonian from a philosophic point of view. I point out here some of the impacts. If you'll notice, the early democracies were pretty well based upon the underlying ordering ideology of Christianity. And if you look at some of the verses out of the New Testament, you understand where it comes from. It says, the greatest among all must be servants of all. If one of you wants to be great, he must be the servant of the rest, and if one of you wants to be first, he must be the slave of the rest. It says, give to the government what it rightly deserves. 4, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. 5, realize that those outside of Christianity need help too. 6, the greatest love, and this is the one I just mentioned, the greatest love that one could have for their friends, and that was in John. I said Mark, but it was John. The greatest love that one could have for their friends is one which would cause them to lay down their lives for those friends. And finally, the one that kind of sums it all up, doing to others as you would like for them to do to you. So that is an underlying value system. If people have that philosophy, then democracy and a democratic republic with a Bill of Human Rights follows with that sense of values rather easily. Now, I have some challenging questions for those who have a problem with the using Christian philosophic guidelines as an underlying ordering ideology for their country's political documents, constitutions, Bill of Rights, whatever. And here's what I say. Which countries in the world whose founders and populations were/are not predominantly Christian would they want to live in? Try to think of that. Secondly, which countries in the world that such that is true are legitimate democratic republics with bills of human rights? Now, it's true. India is one. Japan is one. But they both had help from, in India's case, Great Britain to come up with their democracy, and Japan had help from the United States to come up with their democracy. And here's the most telling one. If you look at, and I say, which have had large and significant incoming worldwide immigration, statistics over an extended period of time. For the last 200 years, if you look at immigration, it's all been to those countries who have the Christianity as the underlying ordering ideology. And then I say, which countries have made major contributions to less fortunate countries without regard to their religious preferences? Which countries have fought and died to preserve the freedom and sovereignty of other countries, all without regard to the citizens' religious preferences, while gaining no additional territory for themselves? Which countries have helped to rebuild an aggressor country which they have defeated in warfare? After World War II, the Japanese and Germans, they wanted to kill us. We won. We lost a lot of good soldiers in those wars. But what did we do when it was over with?
Marshall Plan.
Yeah, that's right. We helped rebuild them. In case of Germany, won. In case of Japan, MacArthur was in charge of that rebuilding, I think. And I ask at the end, well, what non-Christian philosophy could serve and or has historically served as a more constructive and humane underlying ordering ideology for any given free democratic republic with a Bill of Human Rights. And hey, our country hadn't been perfect, but boy, people outside sure like to come here. That's a real compliment. Resultant question number one, I say, why do we not see large numbers of individuals who do not believe in Christ's deity? If you don't believe in his deity, okay. Who wholeheartedly supporting his philosophy. It is the most easily accessible and readily available code of conduct in the world. And if not, what do they offer in its place as codes of conducts and ordering ideologies for society? Here's what Einstein had to say about Christianity and Judaism. He said, if one purges the Judaism of the prophets and Christianity as Jesus Christ taught it, of all subsequent additions, especially those of the priests, one is left with a teaching which is capable of curing all of the social ills of humanity. You know, back in the 70s, I taught mathematics in college, and I did a short little book that I never published but shared and gave talks all over the country on it, called Geometrical and Functional Insights Concerning the Consequences of Relativity Theory. Mm-hmm. And I went through a lot of books trying to learn about it. I also took a National Science Foundation course at the University of Colorado, which covered the topic. But I went through a lot of books covering that, and the easiest one to read was Einstein's. The guy was just totally down to earth. But he did not have the proof of E equals MC squared in that book. Years later, after I'd written the book, I'm talking about 10 or 20 years later, I was reading another book that was just a light fare, I thought, called Ideas and Opinions by Albert Einstein. And that's where I found the proof of E equals MC squared. And a number of years back in this group, I presented the geometrical and functional insights concerning the consequences of relativity theory to this group. When I got through, I told them, I said, I've got the proof for E equals MC squared if you'd like to see it. And they all did. So I showed them that one that night. I had it on PowerPoint like this. And amazing. The proof, E equals MC squared. And how did he prove that? And that's, you know, whenever anybody thinks of the greatest intellectual contribution in the world in physics, a lot of people will say, hey, it's E equals MC squared. You know how he did it? With a pendulum concept. When the pendulum was at the very bottom, it had one type of energy. When it was up at the top, it had another type of energy. At all other points, the total energy was a combination of the two. And that was just in what you would call Einstein's light reading, you know. But I've always been impressed with the guy. Everything that he said, even in terms of pedagogy. He made the statement one time, anything that can be well understood can be simply explained. Well, what I've seen of what he did, he lived up to what he said. Resultant question number 2, why, and here's something I wonder, because of Christ's claims in terms of being a deity, nobody thinks of him as a philosopher. Nobody gives him, you don't see that in any philosophy books, just the guidelines. And it is just totally a philosophy of life. His guidelines are very simple. You know, there was no ceremonies, rituals, or bureaucracies that he endorsed. That's all been added since his time. But I say no other single man has had a greater influence on the world or presented more behavior. Ma'am, while you're here, I'm going to give you something. Save you a trip. No other man has had a greater influence on the world or presented more behavioral
We
guidelines.
got your dinner.
What's that?
We've got your dinner.
Okay, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry.
We've got his dinner.
Oh, gosh. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Habit.
Abbott.
And most would declaim the reason he doesn't get credit as an outstanding philosopher because of his claims of being a deity. But isn't it kind of simple that just based upon the success people have had with his philosophy that they would consider him a great philosopher? Now, so you look at two parts of any religion. The first part is the behavioral guidelines. And I've got those here on this sheet for people who want to copy later. But the other part is the part about making a choice to have a venue for attempted interaction with the deity. In other words, choosing a religion, you might say. And I point out two things here that are scientifically supported. There have been many studies that show that hope promotes optimism. And there have also been many studies which contend that optimism is healthy from a psychological, physiological, and sociological point of view. And so I point out here, given the choice between hope and no hope, I have personally chosen to believe in a certain avenue for the deity. And basically, it's because I find belief in the deity gives me 5 hopes I don't have otherwise. Let me tell you the most significant one. I was in a family of 4. I had a mother, a dad, and a sister who I lost in 2008. All of my immediate family that I was born in is gone. I loved them to death. And I just made up my mind, I'm not gonna go through my life thinking I'll never see them again. That I would be depressed every, pardon my expression, damn day. So I've chosen an avenue. Once you choose an avenue, what kind of hopes can you look forward to? And these 5 hopes, I've given a number of eulogies in my time, and at the end of my eulogy, I point out that, hey, this individual has died with these great hopes and had a look forward to where they were going. And the points are this: you have hope for eternal life, hope for reuniting with departed loved ones, that's the one that I was mentioning, hope for universal eternal justice, in other words, in the long run, hope that everything will be totally just, and hope for an advocate, and in Christianity's case, it's Christ, with the omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient God. In other words, it's like we got a good lawyer to represent us. And fifthly, hope for a loving, forgiving, and compassionate God as evidenced by his provision of Christ, in my case. Other people have other religions, and that's fine. But I just decided that I knew that hope promoted optimism, and that optimism was good psychologically, physiologically, easy for me to say, and sociologically. And so I've got the choice to either be optimistic or pessimistic, to have hope or not. And so that's my choice. Other people have I've got many friends have made other choices. A little brother in my fraternity was atheist, and we got along okay. And you know, we're not all going to agree. And my Lord, let me tell you something. If you got to agree with everybody on everything to be a friend, you're not going to have one friend unless one of them is a clone. I point the other sentence. Secure people don't feel a need to prove anything to others. They can just enjoy life and realize that loving others is the most uplifting activity of all. And I point out that for me, the Christian philosophy is an other-centered antidote for insecurity, depression, and interpersonal dysfunction. But let me also point out one other thing, and this is in the New Testament. Even the New Testament says there are those outside of Christianity who've never seen Christianity, but they are a law unto themselves, and they shall be considered righteous also. So I mean, it's even the New Testament doesn't say, hey, it's all us or none. That's in the New Testament. Now, here I'm going to get on a personal description. In case you've ever wondered what a cranky old curmudgeon is like, I prefer carpet to wood or tile in homes. And I told you I was going to tell you about my sister. In 2008, my sister was in her tile-floored bathroom, slipped, hit her head, and that's what killed her. I hate tile. I got carpet in my bathroom, and I love it. I got carpet virtually everywhere but the kitchen. So if I slip and him gone, you'll say, well, he missed out on part of it. I prefer Formica to marble or granite. This is just an old, I'm 77. I'm acting like it, aren't I? I prefer to wear socks in my shoes. I prefer to wear shirts that are tucked in. I prefer to wear a coat and tie to church, and I stick out like a sore thumb. There might be 2 or 3 others. I prefer to avoid present-day mindless situation comedies on TV which involve crudeness and vile language for sensationalism. Now there are a few. What is this guy that he just went off? He's been around for a long time, and he had a show that, every time they'd say something funny, they'd have a musical tone. I can't remember the guy's name, but I thought that was such a good situation comedy. That was one I'd watch, I can't stand excessive TV and movie explosions, crashes, and violence solely for the sake of sensationalism and without associated meaningful plots. I still prefer the 50s, 60s, and 70s movies and music with meaningful lessons and plots. So I do watch a little TCM, but sometimes they get too old for me. The 30s aren't that good of movies for me. I still think permanent tattoos on kids is not very bright. And I can't stand the Me Too societal cloning, which brings everyone into modern day Vogue like sheep. Vogue is what's popular at the time. And you have no trouble figuring out I have trouble following that. And I said, this old crank pleads guilty. Here's a sign I had in my office for years, and now I've got it in my home that I'm retired. Beware of Vogue mavens. And the reason I started that out is because while I was teaching in college, I would see people pick up with changes in different philosophies of instruction, which, when tested out, batted zero. And but they were always trying to see the next thing that was coming down the pike so they could be up with the latest approach. And this old stick in the mud had difficulty following that. Finally, I want to summarize saying thanks to our good friend Tom Berry. I point out I've never before witnessed such an incredible contribution like that which Tom makes every week here at College of the Complexes. I wish I had lived closer. I'm going to say, I wish I had lived closer. I'm 77 years old and never seen anything like it. It is pure genius, and the continuing, challenging maintenance of it by Tom is total other-centeredness. Let's give him a hand. And I think it's you folks' turn to talk, and I'm sure you'll be happy about that. Yeah. Any questions? By the way, these handouts, I've got 2 handouts. If you're in, I'll put them up here. And one of them is the Christian guidelines. Yeah. If you want, if for just to those that want them, I think I've got enough for everybody. That one of them is some Quran quotes and polling of American Muslims. The white one is that, and the green is Christ's 105 quotes.
You know I take one too.
That's driving me crazy tonight. Huh?
Anyway, Chris, can I ask you a question? It struck me that you might care to comment on Donald Trump's other-centeredness.
Yeah, I didn't say anything about Trump, did I?
Of course you didn't, but
Yeah.
I thought it might be interesting if you looked at these other-centered characteristics and counted off how Trump compared. with
Well,
that.
yeah.
Since he is our president now.
Yeah, I'll tell you this. I would say that when someone is addressing the greater threats to our society, which I consider such things as ISIS, as our low defense posture, as the national debt, if they're addressing those and loss of jobs, if they're addressing those, I think that's trying to help other people, and I think it's other-centered. The one thing that bothers me is that if you take the national debt And if you take the per capita net worth of individual citizens in the United States and then take the national debt and divide it up and subtract their part of the national debt, what you find is that we're providing monies to other countries whose per capita net worth is much higher than ours. It's just that we have a great credit card and we're laying it off on future generations, and I don't think that's other-centered. Yeah, that's one point of view. I was a little disappointed in some candidates during the election not even mentioning the national debt or budget cutting in any way. There were too many proposals for what Coach Lou Holtz said on TV one night. He called them vote bribing entitlements.
Yeah.
And I thought that that's something that we really need to address and come up with some solutions, because we're giving the future generations a lot of debt. Any other questions? Oh, yes, sir.
This might be a little convoluted. Can you hear me okay?
Okay, I can now.
As I understand, part of your thesis is that, say, over the last 200 years, there are very few countries that have had a substantial inward migration of people voluntarily wanting to move to those countries, and those countries have a Judeo-Christian foundation. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
basically underlying ordering ideology. That's my impression.
But aren't there also countries that have a, quote, Christian tradition, unquote, but don't attract people? I would list that-
what?
But that do not attract people. I would list to
Oh.
that Mexico, Central America, South America, Italy,
Oh, I'm sure of that.
Greece.
I'm sure of that.
So, is there a, what is, I mean, I think what you were trying to say is that people were attracted to come to America because of our Judeo-Christian history and foundation, and or the governmental and economic system that grew out of that soil, so to speak, with soil in quotation marks.
I think that's my impression. I believe I could say that you're right about assuming that.
Well then, how do we explain these other countries that also have a, quote, Christian background?
Well, they have
That
Mexico. Yeah.
people don't want to go to.
Yeah. Number one, a bunch of those countries do not have bills of human rights, but the other point is a bunch of those countries haven't been able to exercise the underlying ordering ideology as well as we have here, and as I would say Great Britain and some of the other countries. It's all on a continuum, but you know, up until now, for 200 years, I'd say the United States has done the best job.
Amen to that.
You know, I want to point out one other thing that talking about that, we did, early on, the United States, we did have slavery here. And that, it took them a while to get to where they needed to be. It wasn't right off the bat. But I like to point out to people that according to a book, The Myths That Divide Us, in 1830, there were 350, in the United States, there were 350 black slave owners. Furthermore, in the war, the Confederate War, over 300,000 white soldiers fought and died to end slavery. So what I want to just make the point is that whites alone are not responsible for slavery. It's been reported that 90% of the slaves that were imported from Africa were initially captured by enemy tribes and sold to the slave traders. They didn't have to go out chasing them down. So whites and blacks have both made their contributions, and no one race has a right to feel perfectly innocent in terms of what happened. Any other comments, questions? Well, thank you very much for your attention and your cordial reception. Sorry, this makes me so mad. I was so proud of it when I got it. Paid a pretty good price for it. The back side has controls that are supposed to work like here tonight, but it stopped working with my new computer, and what I have to do is the old one. Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, okay, if we have, this is unusual, we have a real dearth of questions. So, this is very unusual for us. We had a dearth of questions. It's usually the other way around. You mentioned, your focus seems to be on the other-centeredness of Christ's philosophy as set forth in the New Testament documents. Is that correct?
Yeah, and in one statement, or maybe more than one, he made the statement that all of the other guidelines he gave were offshoots and based on that. They depended on that.
Of the love of your neighbor as yourself.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Do you think that Christ has a role? Do you think that Christ's role as a substitutionary atonement for the sin of mankind has anything to do with his role or his philosophy of other-centeredness?
Well, I'd have to say it was an example. He tried to be an example of it, but you know, the things I do not understand with billions of people in the world today, here's a guy that in only 3 years of his life has had the major impact, a greater major impact on the world than anyone before or since, and it's gone on for 2,000 years. I think I'd need God's help to influence 20 people, much less the whole world. And there are about 40% more Christians than Muslims in the world. Christianity is the largest religion. Islam is the second largest. If they keep decapitating the Christians over in the Middle East, they might get down to the same number, you know.
I've heard a rumor that the word HISTORY, history, is actually an acronym for the two words, his story. Do you think that's true?
You know, I do. A guy that spoke here not long ago, Paul Benson, does a lot of religious history. And one of the things I love about his talks, in every talk, he gives you somewhere between 5 and 10 words that he shows you the sources of. And like that history, it makes sense to me.
Picking up on where our friend over here mentioned about countries that people with Christian heritages that people don't come to. It seems to me that there is a dichotomy between countries that follow basically the teachings of Christ and those that get very heavy into religious dogma, where religious dogma basically controls, what that country thinks about the Bible or religion or something like that. Do you think that has anything to do with whether or not people would want to come to a country?
Gosh, I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding what you're telling me. By religious dogma, are you talking about other religions, or are you talking...
Even in Christianity, if you follow the history of the church, I think we can all believe that Christianity was fairly pure at the beginning, but then you get into like church councils and, you know, and then
Yeah.
it says, this is what we believe, and if you don't believe it, we're gonna cut your head off.
There's a
Yeah.
famous author who has addressed that somewhat, and he says, you know, he believed in the practice of Christianity before they developed all the rituals, costumes, and ceremonies. And that's why I call myself an extreme Jeffersonian. That green sheet that I handed out, it's got 105 guidelines that Christ put out. That's, as far as I'm concerned, the heart and soul of Christianity. The formalities, I never have been a fan of, nor the bureaucracies. But I'll say this, they've probably done more harm than good, but that's just not my cup of tea.
So would you agree that the closer Christianity is practiced according to the teachings of Christ, the more likely people are to want to come to that country?
I agree with that, and I also will say this, as far as I'm concerned, no one would need any more than that one sheet with 105 guidelines. That, as far as I'm concerned, if you've got that, you probably know more than most people who have a Bible that thick. More important. Okay, well, golly, hey, thank you folks very much. I appreciate the reception. It was very awkward for me because of this darn mouse.
Yeah, it's a Terminator.
I didn't describe that like I really wanted to. No, it was wonderful.
Okay, now it's your turn to talk. Come on up here. You get to respond to what the speaker had to say, and the chair is here. Whoever wants to say, you got 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Well, I won't take 5 minutes. I'll be very quick. I come from a different background. I've seen a lot of intolerance. I think what the speaker said sometimes tonight sometimes leads to fostering more of that. Abraham was Jewish, Isaac was Jewish, Jacob, Leah, Rachel, Rivka, Sarah, the founders of most of modern day Judaism and Christianity. Moses was Jewish, Jesus gave his life for the faith, and my view is if it was good enough for Jesus, Judaism should be good enough for you, first and foremost, without all the overlayers. That's my saying.
Who's next? There's gotta be a next. Any other comments? Are we, no one has anything to say? Speaker, come on up here, Jim.
Those cords are on the floor, so watch them. Jim tries to give himself a rule of don't get up here twice, so if you speak before the speaker does, then shut up.
No.
And my second rule to myself is, Tom and I have been putting this on since February of 6 years ago. And I just mostly do the technical part of it, and Tom does most of the getting of speakers. I've done it when he's been out of town for a month at a time, or when he had his stroke several years ago, and the doctor said, don't do that for 6 months, you know, so I kind of had to step up to the bar and do it. And frankly, I've enjoyed the group. You know, we have a group of core people who've come over a period of time. And some come and some go, some move here and some move away. We miss those who are gone. It's been a great group. And at the beginning, I know Tom and I talked about minimizing the discussion of religion and some political subjects that are sensitive to people and maybe upsetting to them. But frankly, you know, over the last couple of years, we've gotten pretty loosey-goosey about that, and we don't really have any problem with it. You guys are really good at listening to someone who you agree with and someone you may not agree with at all, and you stay peaceful. That's, to me, that's a great group. You know, our speaker tonight blended, you know, some very technical points in with his religious viewpoints. And, you know, I got acquainted with Chris the first time he came to the group here, and I've really enjoyed his teaching. And since, as he and I were talking before the meeting tonight, you know, I served as a counselor for the Dallas County Community College system as a CPA for 20 some odd years. I don't remember exactly how long it lasted, but I did it for a long time. And you know, Grover, who's gotten very frail now, his wife comes when she can, and she can leave Grover, but he can barely get by on his walker now. He was a teacher down at the school as well. It's a great organization. Dallas is very fortunate to have that community college system. It allows a lot of people to go to school who couldn't afford to or who couldn't physically get to, you know, one of the four-year universities. And anybody who contributes to that, you know, I tip my hat to them. As our country has evolved, it becomes less and less comfortable to most people to get at a stand and in front of microphones and say anything about their personal religious beliefs. And you know that I get up and I talk periodically. I might occasionally make some comment about it, but I want Chris to know that I appreciate him blending that in with his presentation tonight. Thank you. It means a lot when a person opens up, as you would say if this were a church podium instead of the one we have here tonight, opens his heart to the people. A pastor might say that. And you know, we've gone through and surveyed the people in this group on different occasions for different reasons. And we have a lot of people who've grown up in one church or another, and then they have gone to another church because they changed their viewpoints, or they stopped going to church because, for whatever reason, they no longer want to participate in a church group, or they no longer want to have anything to do with religion. We know one very strong-willed atheist who we have come and talk with us about once a year. He sort of rattles our cages, don't he? Because he doesn't just say it mildly. He says it strongly. Our Jewish brother who came up here just before me, I think the world of him as an attorney and as a person here in Dallas, and I appreciate his comments tonight. I've told some of you this. I grew up in South Dallas in what was then the Temple Emmanuel neighborhood. It was very mixed. That wasn't common in Dallas at the time. Half my neighbors were Jewish. They went to Temple Emmanuel. Starting at our fence going south was what you would then call Black South Dallas. Now you would call it the beginning of the Afro-American community. But my neighbors were about 1/3 Jewish, 1/3 Black, and 1/3 white European of some sort. I'm a Heinz 57. So I'm not just one thing. I can't identify like Tom with Ireland. But that was a very pleasant neighborhood. I grew up thinking the world of the Jewish community. So I know Chris well enough to know that when he talked about Christianity tonight, although he didn't verbalize it, he was folding his beliefs in the Jewish tradition that became part of Christianity into the things that he said tonight. That's what I would do. You know, I value those things, and they're important to us, whether we actively participate in a church or not. If you go and study the writings, and as most of you who know me well know that I'm a prolific reader, too much really. If you go back and read the writings of our country's founders, even those who were agnostic, and there were several of the major ones who were, or were atheistic, and there was some of that, and then there was a mixture of the Northern European churches, the Church of England and the Lutheran Church and whatnot. Much of what, like Chris said tonight, much of what was foundational material that went into our Declaration of Independence, into our Constitution, and into the bylaws that we've written, particularly in the early years of it, those first 20, were threaded with religious beliefs. Many schools in the early years did not have textbooks. They taught out of the scripture. Our country has changed a lot over a period of time, and I don't have any problem with that evolution, really, I don't. But you have to, if you live here, you know, I have two friends who moved here from Syria. I have a friend who moved here from Damascus. And a Persian friend and family who cannot even take his family home because it's dangerous. This is a wonderful country to come to. People come here from all over the world, from all kinds of religions. At my wife's funeral 13 years ago, the Persian came and spoke at the funeral. The Japanese manager down at Baylor came and talked at her funeral. So we've become a very amalgamated society. We haven't blended, we haven't all become one, have we? Thank goodness. It'd be boring. We're very different. But it's exciting and it's good, and I'm glad to be part of it, just as I'm glad to be part of this group, which is a small group compared to the world or the country, but it brings out great people who have very different thoughts, and we put them together in a way that makes all of us think. We don't have to be all alike. We're not a threat to each other. We don't get up and yell at each other when somebody says something we don't agree with, you know. And we go home with a smile on our face. So again, like I started off tonight, thanks for coming out tonight. We appreciate your presence, and it means a lot to us.
Who's next? Is that it? Am I the last one standing? Ah, John, come on up here.
Okay, I was.
Well, that was very interesting. Of course, I grew up in England, lived through the war and the aftermath of the war. That was pretty severe. We were all Church of England, actually, by automatically. So in schools, we had religious instruction. In fact, my first prize was for religious instruction. You know. Religion in England is a fairly benign thing. No one carries it around on their sleeves. They don't thrust it down your throat. Politicians never talk about religion. It's just not done. Now, of course, I came here because in the 60s, late 60s, the US was short of engineers and scientists. So companies like Xerox went and recruited people like me. And of course, engineers in England were never paid well, still are not paid very well. It's been a century of underfunding in science and technology, and that's basically ruined the country. Okay, finance has taken over, and that's ruining the country as well now. But anyway, so I came and joined Xerox, and in those days, Xerox was a wonderful company. The founder, Joe Wilson, was a wonderful man. He really cared about the people. I mean, it was amazing to think that when I traveled on a plane, it was first class. We all traveled first class. He died, and so when I joined, Xerox was just over about $1 billion company. It was 2 billion, 3 billion. It was going up and up. So
What year?
I joined in '68. Came to '68. People thought I was mad, you know, to come. There was shootings of presidents and religious teachers and all the rest of it. But we came, and we've done well, because I came as an educated person, and you know, really couldn't fail. What I have seen, I think, is a deterioration of what I would call the concern of corporations and politicians about other people. I do not see concern and kindness. What I do see, especially, and it's true in Europe as well, I see the promotion of greed and selfishness. I mean, the very antithesis of what you were saying. And it actually has an effect on results. See, when you don't care about people, when you work for a company who doesn't give a damn about people, I mean, Xerox business philosophy continuously since the late 80s is laying off people. You know, that seems to be their stock in trade. Now, the other stock in trade seems to be, well, we'll go overseas and we'll buy cheap and we'll come back here and sell high. The only problem with that philosophy is it doesn't work, because the economy is kept going by people buying stuff. Now, when people are earning less and less, they have less money to spend. So the equation doesn't work. Now, what does work is monumental debt. And so what's happened to this economy is it's become a debt economy. So when you look at the components of debt, it's not just federal debt. I mean, that can be handled. The biggest debt is the banks, by far. 2/3 of the accumulation of debt is by banks. Household debt has gone up because that's the only thing that's kept this economy afloat, is debt. And it's an acceleration of debt. It's not just a steady climb, linear. It's actually asymptotic. And of course, you can't sustain this. So this is why you see this crashes. And this problem, because you're not, the money flow, and I'll talk about this, is not equating. So because you've had greed and you've had wealth creation. When you have wealth creation, that doesn't go back into the money flow. So I think this, you know, if you're going to have Christianity, if you believe in it as a country, you have to act like it. You really have to actually act out in the corporate workplace. You can't just say, well, okay, I have to protect my shareholders and maximize profit, and therefore I have to ship off a production base to Mexico, China, wherever. Now, if that's a Christian attitude, bless me, I can't be a Christian, okay? Because I would never do that. Never do that to my fellow, work people, okay? And I don't know how these people have done it with good conscience to their fellow Americans. It's the most unpatriotic thing I've ever seen. And when I see these politicians coming out on the steps of the Congress, all wearing an American lapel pin, and they've been, both parties have been complying with this gross transfer of wealth overseas, I can't believe it. Yeah, they've done well, and of course they're all bought, as Tom says, they're all bought and paid for, all right? But we'll come back to what you were talking about, you know, helping others, helping the country, helping your community, putting back in. I don't see any of these people putting anything back in. I mean, it's absorbing wealth, okay?
Where do you think things are better or best? Where would be an example of what you think is better than what we got?
Well, certainly not.
Norway.
No, well, actually, generally speaking, the highest standards of living is in the Scandinavian countries because they actually do have a social welfare system. Like my wife's in Finland, and every Finnish baby gets a box, okay, when they're born. They have a free educational system, okay? Now, these things, I think, are telling on what should be a Christian country, okay? Like a single-payer healthcare system. England still has the NHS single-payer system. The cost per person is $3,000 a year per person. Everyone's covered. By the way, the party now wants to destroy it because, of course, they believe in private healthcare. Okay, in America, it's like $12,000 a person, and not every. So it's vastly inefficient. This system, oh yeah, the government's bad, but government-run systems are efficient, far more efficient. Now, one day I will describe why that is. Okay, it's easily proven using differential equations. Actually, it's obvious why it is. When you chase money and wealth creation, you actually do not have the supply and demand equating, and that's what we've seen. So what I would say is, yes, I would, as I say, I studied the Bible, but I have a huge distinction between the Old Testament and New Testament. I think the Old Testament has got nothing to do with Christianity, never did. They're not connected at all. The messages coming out are very, very different. In fact, Christianity really, I believe, didn't originate in what's called the Holy Land. I think it's proven by some people that it came from the very Far East, actually. And in fact, he went back there when he died, actually, Jesus. So that's what many people in England believe, actually, what happened. Because, yes, the principles of helping others, that's what I try to do, is very well worth following. But I do not see that at the corporate level. I do not see that at the political level. And I think that's why the country's gone off track. People can feel it. This is why we've had these elections where people want change. They don't know quite how to do it, okay? But they want change. This is why they voted for Trump, because he said, I'll bring the jobs back, I'll change, blah, blah, blah. There's no he can't do it because he doesn't have a proper plan to do it. Cutting, giving more money to the wealthiest, certainly won't do it. We've had 35 years of that. And so wealth creation does not mean business creation and growth. In fact, the very reverse. Because the money flows just don't add up. So anyway, I would conclude in saying, look, I would love to see more Christianity in this country. I think since I've lived here, we've seen a lot less.
Well, there's nothing like comments by John to get me up out of my seat. I think that single-payer health is not the road to tyranny. It is actually one of the very cornerstones of nouveau feudalism in a 21st century global gulag. When we begin to give up our rights for benefits and privileges, I think we're following a very misguided path. And as far as comments about the New and Old Testament, that there is controversy there. There's definitely controversy. Some years ago, I had the amazing honor, I suppose I'd say, to work with one of the people working on Bible codes. And the man's name was Alan Neal, and his system was called the Infinity Bible Code. Many of the Bible codes only worked in the Old Testament. He had a system that worked through both Old and New Testament. And really his particular code was a guide to spiritual study, and it worked off numerology of Hebrew letters and names in the Bible, and you could find the same issues being addressed from the Old Testament to the New Testament if you followed those threads, and it gave you a complete story. People get upset by some of the villages being wiped out in the Old Testament, some of the commands that were given. I'm not God. I can't tell you why. Some people put it down to genetic mutation and imperfect strains, that if the human race was going to survive and go forward, needed to disappear. But that's conjecture. I think part of my story was having a Bible study talk with a dear friend who's now passed away, Mr. Seidler, and visiting about Jesus and so forth. And finally I just said, John, I can't get your Jesus. I just don't really have a sense, I don't have a connection to that Jesus. I said, if you really want to know Jesus, if you want to find Jesus, at least the Jesus I'm talking about, you need to go study with a good Jewish rabbi. And the irony of it is that he ended up doing some work as a cameraman for a, I don't know if I'd call it messianic Christian group, but it was kind of a Jewish roots group where we had rabbis coming in and speaking, and occasionally members of the Knesset coming in and visiting with the congregation and so forth. And there's so many points in Christianity that do not make sense unless you understand the Hebrew context. When you take it out of that context, you're a Roman. You're with the Romans, the Romans who came in and basically wiped out Jerusalem, scattered the Jews. So I know people who really affirm and claim that Jesus was a Torah observant Hebrew in everything he did. There are people who contest that. One of the other things I'll share just real briefly here, and I mean this is like compressing years, but I was raised an atheist. I lost my atheism when I came in contact with paranormal research and began doing paranormal phenomena myself. That put me on a quest because I didn't have a philosophy at that point. I ended up traveling to India. Actually, I left home at 16. At 17, I traveled to India. I studied over there, and I observed miracle after miracle, violations of the laws of physics being performed by holy people over there. Many of the miracles of Jesus were performed by people I encountered over there, to the point where I'm sitting back here and I'm saying, well, I have no bar at this point from believing in Jesus, because I've seen everything except water into wine, and that's just something they don't do over there. So I didn't get any laughs on that. I mean, come on, guys, lighten up. No water into wine. Hindus don't do water into wine, okay? Okay, thank you. So anyway, that was a beginning of at least a very serious 14-year spiritual quest. And I would characterize it, I characterize the atheism, the secular humanism I came from, with all the well-meaning intentions, trying to help everybody and so forth, and yet there's this strange thing that keeps turning up called collectivism, which seems to be the default for people who don't have a strong faith in one of the major religions. And so I see this dynamic between individual and collective or collectivism. And in case you haven't noticed, the Constitution, written out of biblical verses, there are about 30 verses that are that parts of the Constitution are taken from directly. That you cannot reserve rights to the collective, but you can to an individual. In fact, I think the whole thing through. How can you have a collective right to free speech? You have the right to agree with the collective. Try going against the common mean. You don't have any right personally then. So I'll just leave it at that. I'm over my time.
Comments breed comments, don't they? John made a comment tonight that I have a thing about, so I'll make a comment about it. And that is some of our proposed tax changes. John and our press frequently refer to things that are returns to the previous as increases. Well, technically, you can say that are decreases. You can say that the president wants to decrease the taxes on the rich. And that's just about all you'll see in the newspapers. But you know what? That is a distortion of truth in reality. What that is a cancellation of an increase that was put in place during the Obama administration. Well, that's very different. That's like the former president saying, the stock market grew from 6,700 to whatever it was, 13 or 14,000 during my term. Well, that is a true statement, but it's also a terrible distortion of truth. Just before he came into office, the stock market was much, much, much higher than that. During the Great Recession, it fell almost 50%. So most of that movement upward was not growth. It was what you call recovery. That's like when you fall skiing and you tear up your knee and the doctor goes in there and surgically repairs that. He may restore it to the condition it was in, and that's healing. He may make your knee better than it was before. That's improvement. That's where the improvement starts. So, we all know that politicians say things that make their point that are outside of reality. We hear those so much. We don't know truth from total fiction. And the only way you find out is to do more than read the headlines in the newspaper or listen to the 3 main channels on regular TV and the 2 main news channels on cable, because they don't tell you the whole truth. They lie to you by omission. Amen? Thank you. I think that's all I had to say that's of importance. But I thank you again for coming out tonight. I think we have one more person who wants to speak. Come right on up, it's yours. Let me get out of there
All right,
first.
let you get out first.
Yeah, there's too many, and watch the wires on the floor.
Okay.
You can trip and fall on your head real easily.
I can see that. Well, I enjoyed the talk tonight, and our speaker made the point. He tied other-centeredness with Christian philosophy, and I believe that's exactly right. I want to make the point that when you look at things that people have done as far as establishing other-centered institutions throughout history, you'll find that Christians were behind most of them. For instance, name a hospital that doesn't have a religious connotation. Presbyterian Hospital, Methodist Hospital, Baylor Hospital, and you could name hundreds of others. Florence Nightingale was a Christian. She started the Red Cross. There's any number of institutions that have been established in our society based on a Christian philosophy as practiced by the person who started it. Now that to me is a demonstration of other-centeredness that is about as meaningful as you can get. Name me a hospital that was started by an atheist. Anything like the Red Cross that was started by an atheist. Or have any Muslims ever started a hospital or something to help people like that? You'll always find that there's a Christian behind those institutions that started them, which is the outworking of that Christian philosophy of other-centeredness that our speaker was talking about.
Exactly same design.
I guess I'm the last one standing, so I want to thank our speaker. I think he did a great job here tonight.
I did have one clarification I wanted to make.
Well, we'll let you do it.
Okay.
Anyway, he brought out, excuse me, he brought out a lot of things about where we're going, how we're going to get there, and so on. But one of the things that struck me from what your speech was that you were all the people that came to this country because it was the place to go, and I don't know if that's going to continue to happen. And it's one thing to be caught up in a religious belief. It's another to look at the reality of what's happening and what to do about it. And what's happening, I think, is that our society, as John pointed out, is deteriorating. And it's deteriorating around us. And it's not just religion. It's a lot. It's something that in my view, anyway. See, I'll give you a little history. I was a chairman for a union for 20 years. And in that process, I was lucky. I negotiated a 6-hour workday in the railroad industry. No one ever did it. And we got lucky. We was at O'Hare Airport in Chicago, and we had to put on 6 flagmen around the clock for 6 years. And we did that, put on 3 shifts, and the fellow shows up for work, and the airport guard says, "Park your car here, we'll drive you out there, security." Well, by the time they got him out there, the guy who was relieving was on overtime. The company said, "We're not paying this overtime." "Well, get here early." "Well, you're going to pay him to get early?" "I pay him to get early." "Well, then, you set this up." So anyway, they cut all the overtime. So we went to conference. Well, anyway, I filed a day's pay for 6 men on the extra board for not being called to go to work, to relieve the guy to go to eat, I should say. And then I filed another day's pay for everybody working for me, denied the right to eat. And this went on for 4 months. Finally, we got to conference, and the division manager said, "I'm not paying nothing." I said, "You don't pay these claims, we're going to take you to arbitration, we're going to clean your clocks, it'll cost you a fortune." He said, "I'll pay these claims, rise overtime and no meal periods." So, fine. I said, put on 4 shifts. 4 shifts, yeah, we won't worry about the overtime, we won't worry about the meal periods, but you will pay the claims. Then he fought me about whether to pay the extra board or the guy on the job. We want to pay them both. If we went to arbitration, take another 3 years. So I settled it for 4 hours extra pay for everybody working for 4 months, and 4 hours extra pay for everybody on the extra board for 4 months, plus all the overtime. It cost them a fortune, but they paid it. And we had a 6-hour day, 8 hours pay. It lasted for 5.5 years. And he wouldn't sign off on it because he wanted to set a precedent, but he did anyway. And that's why I know a 6-hour day works. And I know that today in society, We got 25 million people out of work in this country, either unemployed or underemployed. And they're not paying taxes into society. We're paying for them. That's hurting our country. And we need to have them working again. And as John pointed out, corporations have left town to go overseas where labor costs are cheaper, and they're trying to sell things back here. The end result is you don't have the jobs. You don't have the jobs, you don't have the money. The economy is going to collapse. And if you have a collapsed society, it'll be like Wehrmacht Germany. Your dollar won't buy anything. You'll be picking shit with the chickens, if you don't mind my saying. So anyway, that's where you're going to be at. So what can we do about it? In my view, I did mention that Congress has to do something. And we have the best Congress money can buy. That's the problem we have, and it's one of the biggest problems we have. And that has to change. And how can they have to change it. How are we going to get Congress to change anything? So what will they vote for? In my view, they will vote for free airtime, the last 90 days of a general election. They'll vote for that because they get to keep the money they raised, plus there's no history of a challenger beating an incumbent since before the year 2000, and they'll go for it. And once they put that in place, some challengers will beat some incumbents because they will get free airtime too. And when that happens, everything will change. They'll represent the people that do the electing instead of representing the people that are buying their vote in Washington. Then you might be able to put tariffs on corporations that are overseas. Our current president's talking about put tariffs on Mexico. If you do that, they're going to put tariffs on you. You're going to have a price war. You know that. That's not going to solve any problem at all. But what we need to do is put tariffs on corporations that are overseas that left us. Apple produces everything in China. They don't produce anything here. So if you put a tariff on them, what would they pay? They pay the difference in labor costs, the difference in environmental protections, the difference in transportation costs, maybe the difference in taxes. That's what you pay to sell it here and produce it somewhere else. If you don't like that, produce it here. And if you produce it here, you don't have to pay those charges. That would be the way to do it. And then if they did that, they would end up, you'd have jobs here. And if you had jobs here, then you could shorten the workday. And if you could shorten the workday, you get a 6-hour day. Well, I know that works. You don't need a lunch break. If you only work 6 hours, you're in and out of there. And you don't gain 2 hours leisure time. You already lost it in traffic. You get it back. So that'd make a better society. You'd have more people working, paying taxes. You'd have less people not working, draining taxes. The government get a twofold benefit of increased tax revenue, not raising taxes. There'd be less bills to pay for people who aren't working as they'd be working. You'd have an economy that grows with itself. That would be my view of what could happen in this country. Anyway, I better shut up while I'm ahead. You can give this back to our original speaker.
You know, I think he really believes what he says. Comes off pretty strong. We appreciate that, Tom. I had a brain, you know what, tonight when I tried to tell you what was on that pillow that my sister gave me.
Oh, yeah.
Before I get to it, I do want to bring one point. There's one thing about religion that is considered from time to time, and that is the possibility of being possessed. Well, let me tell you, when I look back at my life, I think between the ages of 5 and 7 that I was possessed. I was terrible. My sister was 6 years older than me, and I'll tell you what, she saved my life by grabbing a hold of me and taking me home. I bet about half the people in the neighborhood before I went to school was throwing rocks at the kids going to a school across the street from me, and this is terrible, but I pushed one of my best friends off the top of a garage. Now, when you're between 5 and 7, that's really dangerous. And you know, I tell you, I don't think I know that guy, you know. When I look back, and I never can really figure out, but I think that I was possessed during that time. Thank God, hopefully it's over. The other point I was going to say is that pillow that my sister gave me, that I was so proud of, had on it, she said, and it really, I didn't deserve it, okay? It should have been the other way around. She said, on the pillow, I got it still at home, I smile because you are my brother. I laugh because there's nothing you can do about it. And one other thing to my Jewish friend, I did want to say one thing. I'm proud of the fact that our country is supporting Israel, and I know that you're maybe a little short patience with some Christians, but let me tell you, one of the guys, one of the big Christians that's over at Israel working all the time is Governor Huckabee, and he's over there. It seems like 3 or 4 times a year and supporting them every way he can. So, you know, the ill feelings aren't really returned to you folks, because a lot of us are happy to support your country.
My country is the United States.
Well, yeah, I'll say a Jewish country also, and that's what Israel is. And I'm glad to see that we're coming on and with even more support lately. Thank you very much, folks.
Well, that ends our formal meeting for tonight. They kick us out here at 10:30. That's when they close, so you got time to talk to our speaker or whatever you want to do. And I'll see you all next week. How are Ruby Ridge, Waco, and Vince Foster connected? Why should we care? That's next week.
Whoa. Conspiracies.
I'm good at what I do. Out of 2,500 cases,
Tom, I just texted Susan. I told her you were passionately speaking about this. Good point, though. I wish you were true. I mean, I wish you.